They called the place the Sea of Dunes because from a distance the ripples looked like a frozen ocean. 1,000 miles of glassy sand under a sky that never stayed the same. Storms rose from the horizon like beasts, and at the center of that desert, where ancient basalt towers and rusted scavenger forts clustered like coral, the market of Sabaresh burned with 1,000 small fires and a single outrage. On a raised platform of corrugated metal, ringed with cheering men and the dull, business-like faces of armed enforcers, the alien the other was displayed to a crowd that had seen little besides hunger, war caravans, and the occasional meteor of new tech. She stood forward like a statue, tall, and not merely tall, but carved in a language the desert's people did not speak. Her skin shimmered in colors that made the crowd squint, pearlescent blues that shifted into soft violets. Veins of faint light that crawled beneath the surface like living constellations. Her eyes were a clear, luminous blue that seemed to see past the immediate heat and the ropes and the surrounding faces. To something far beyond the dunes, they had bound her with chains not designed for a person but for a machine. Black iron links eaten by sand and the acid of old oceans. A pair of rough hands clamped around the chains at her chest, not as protection, but as possession. The man holding her was of the desert, weathered skin, hair like parched grass, eyes shaded by hard life. He smelled of smoke and oil and the long miles between settlements. Around them, armored figures and scavenged plating kept the crowd at bay and watched for the signal that would turn the ritual into commerce. Jalen had been crossing the Sea of Dunes for 3 weeks. He had been a caravan guard once, a trader's son once, then a fighter, and a man who learned to read the wind and the rumble of engines in the way the old world ships once read stars. He had come to Sabaresh not by plan, but by the need to find work, to buy a patch of clean water, to exchange favors and secrets for the next stretch of road. What he did not expect was to find an alien pinned on a stage, like a prize catch. Sunlight making the colors of her skin look like a lying jewel. Something in him, a tilt of the jaw. A memory of childhood cruelty rose up. The enforcers clapped their gauntlet hands, and a crate at the edge of the platform was opened. Inside lay a device. One of the last of its kind, a stunner that merchants used to quiet beasts and stubborn machines. Its hum was triumphant. The mayor of Sabaresh raised a voice, and speech spilled over the crowd. Auction. The last of it. Behold, an envoy from the beyond. Whoever claims her, claims the favor of the North Lords. A murmur rolled like heat. Hands reached for credit chips, for tokens, for favors. Jalen felt his own pockets empty of currency and full of other things, a memory of a little sister's laugh, promise that will never be sold. He glanced at the alien's face. She did not look terrified in the way the crowd expected. Her expression was something else. Slow recognition, as if she had dreamed a man with Jalen's hands and had found him in the wrong place. He moved without reason. The crowd was thick like a sandstorm. Jalen's right hand closed around one of the chains. Steel was colder than he expected. In the next breath, he felt the shock of a hand at the back of his neck, the enforcer's grip. "You don't get to touch what we sell," the enforcer said. But his voice had the soft hesitation of someone who'd liked the idea of another kind of life once and then sold it. The alien's voice cut across the noise. And for once in Sabaresh, the market fell into a silence deeper than a sand drift. It was not a voice in his head. It vibrated through the steel like a tuning fork. For all the vast distances between their kinds, it spoke a syllable of common trade patois, the old tongue used between species. Help. There it was. A sound that could have been an animal's plea for water, but it was precisely formed and meant for him. Jalen's decision was sudden and simple. He grabbed both chains, took a breath, and pulled. A dozen angry hands and 2 automatic guns answered. The sound of metal against metal rang like a bell. The enforcers moved to restrain him. But he had something they did not. The certainty of a man who had been poor his whole life and knew exactly what freedom felt like when it touched his palms. "Now," the alien whispered, and her breath smelled of rain on a planet he had never seen. He shoved one pair of hands away, twisted his body, and ran. The stage toppled. The crowd parted reflexively from the spectacle, part curiosity, part fear, and Jalen dashed through the gap, dragging the chained alien as if she were a heavy sail. Shouts rose like crows, engines revved, and the line of enforcers turned into a hunting pack. They crashed through a tangle of stalls, where women sold solar-baked fruit, and a boy tried to solder a transmitter for a pocket of refugees. A scavenger truck roared, a cloud of dust spiking behind, and then the whole market became a maelstrom. Jalen felt metal links cut his palms. He felt the alien's skin warm beneath the cold steel press against him. She reached up, a hand grazing his temple. And for a moment, he saw the desert reflected in her eyes. Towers, distant blue, like an ocean, and a ship buried in the dunes. They were not running blind. The alien, who by the time Jalen lunged through the outer market, had already spoken her name, told him where to go in a series of quick commands, phrases woven from the trade patois, guttural syllables of her own language, and a kind of silent map that came alive when she touched his wrist. She pointed toward the northern ridge, where 3 rusted pylons arranged like the fingers of a hand made a shadow. Under the 3rd, she said, "There, the path." They ran across a strip of open sand into the zone the scavengers called the Warped Wastes. Here the ground was stitched with scars from old battles, collapsed frames of caravans half swallowed by dunes, and the skeletons of walkers. The enforcers were trained to run across these wastes. They had the gear, but Jalen had more. He had the desperation of a man who had promised himself never to let another go. He had the alien's guidance and the knowledge that in the dunes, nothing moved faster than a man who had learned to listen to the wind. The chase was long. A truck with a blast ram mounted on its nose tried to cut them off. Jalen vaulted over a drift, his boots sinking, and the alien slid. Not falling, but glowing in a way that made the truck's driver blink. That small pause gave Jalen the window. He launched himself up the truck's side, grabbed a hitch, and in a few brutal seconds had forced the driver to spin the wheel and raise his gun. The first truck went. Down like a dying beetle, the crowd's reverie of violence turned on itself, and 2 more hunters stalled. The desert swallowed a lot of things, but not the sight of a man and another leaping into a narrow canyon beneath the 3rd pylon. They scrambled into the shaft and found, behind a drift of scrap and the carcass of an old rover, a collapsed maintenance shaft. The alien touched the walls, and the metal hummed under her hands. The shaft gave them a space to breathe. "Who are you?" Jalen asked, his voice a rasp, lungs burning. She tilted her head, and there was a small, almost amused tilt at the corner of her mouth. "Call me Eryth," she said. "From the vessel Farah, they call our kind envoys. Sometimes they call us weapons. Sometimes both. The Farah." The name stirred old traders' tales, a ship of rumors, of rare salvage tech and lost colonies. People spoke of its silhouette cutting through nebulae, or its crash on this planet like a comet that forgot where it was dropping. "You crashed here." Eryth's eyes darkened. "Fell. We fell. Our transit matrix fractured. We survived the atmosphere, but not the landing. 30 of us buried. Communications dead. We were small and hidden. They found me. Who found you?" Jalen asked, though he already knew. "The market's mayor. The enforcers. Men who sold what they found. Your kind," she said, and the bitterness in her tone was patient, like a tide. "But not all of your kind. There are pockets who show mercy. The mercer in Gol, the med priest of Wadi. You are one such." She looked at him with a question that hung like a token. She had seen the look in men, but had chosen to resist. He could give her the story of how he had once been something else. A better man, perhaps, but he kept it simple. "I am someone who doesn't like seeing other beings bound." Eryth studied him a beat, then nodded. "That will be both problem and advantage." They slept for an hour beneath the shaft, the chains clinking when Eryth shifted. Jalen sat with his back against cool metal and watched the light move across her skin as if it were a living weather system. It was not violent. It seemed to catalog the cave, to remember the structure of rebar and the tiny fossils of old wiring. She hummed quietly, a sound like someone tuning a radio. When she spoke again, it was about the Farah, in staccato bursts that Jalen pieced into meaning. Our mission was salvage, to gather lost artifacts and stabilize the transits, she said. The Farah was not a warship. We were carriers of knowledge. Then the transit storm, it took our matrix. We planted beacons. They failed. My crew? I tried to save them. I failed. Why would anyone sell you? That question had hung for a long time. People traded bodies and tech in the Sea of Dunes. Sometimes both were the same currency. Why not hide? Asterisk, she gave him a look like a blade. We were visible. The crash signature was large. The sound drew parties. They came with nets and promises. They burned our beacon frames for copper. They dissected a walker for its fuel core. There is ignorance that sells, and there is greed that buys. They came with a license from the North Lords, and with that license came the right to name us salvage. Jalen thought of licenses and of courts that sold verdicts. He thought of the prison ships that carried debtors to work as servitors. He thought of the little girl back in a town called Kor, whose laugh he had once promised to keep. The desert did not reward promises with gold, but sometimes they ripened into action. Then we get you off the planet, Jalen said, with the raw simplicity of someone who had decided to move a mountain because he could. We get you to the old docks. They still run a freighter route if you have enough cargo and the right coin. Eryth's eyes sharpened. The old docks are policed by the Rift Wardens. They will not turn a blind eye to an alien manifest. Then we don't register you, he said, a grin breaking the hardened lines of his face. We sneak you aboard a salvage freighter. I know people who owe me favors and who don't like the North Lords. Hey, there was the plan in a breath. Salvage. Credits cobbled together. Favors called in. A night run. Jalen outlined it in casual strokes, the sort a man uses to cover fear with competence. Eryth listened, and in the listening, she touched his forearm like a promise. There is something else, she whispered. The Farah's core still pulses. It is where the Matrix died. If we leave it buried, someone will take its technology and make weapons. Help me get the core. If we take it from the sands, we can ensure it is put beyond crude hands. Okay, an extra peril stacked on an already dangerous plan. But danger had a way of clarifying choices. Jalen was not a man of principles so much as he was a man with a streak of stubbornness. If he had any code, it was to right wrongs he could reach. We take the core, he said. We bury it deeper. So they did what any cast-off pair of fugitives might do in a world that sold souls by the scoop. They planned and they stole time. Over 2 days they moved like ghosts at the market's edges. Jalen revisited a friend who ran a repair pit for stripped engine blocks and traded a favor from years back for a battered convey that still held stealth plating. Eryth, in turn, worked the light in ways that made closed eyes see things that were not there. Luminous illusions, brief and perfect, that hid them as they moved goods past guards. On the night they chose to go for the core, the sky over Sabaresh rumbled with a distant storm, one of those low, angry masses that could hide the sound of trucks and the whine of trackers. Jalen strapped in the chains, now wrapped in cloth cut. From an old sail and felt the alien's small hand on his wrist, she whispered a word in her own tongue, soft as the sound of rain. And then there was only the motor's cough in the sand whipping past. They reached the Farah's crater without being seen. The wreck lay like a ship stared into by a blind god. Its panels peeled back by the wind and the scavengers before them. Skeletons of transit pylons jutted from the sand like ribs. Jalen had tools, Eryth had keys of sound. Together they descended into the belly, where the core pulsed a faint. Mournful light. It was a beautiful thing, and a dangerous thing. The core looked less like an engine than like a living song trapped in glass, a crystalline lattice wrapped in bands of memory. And at its center, the transit matrix, still humming the last rhythms it had ever played. For a moment, Eryth's jaw tightened with reverence. She reached out to it, and the light on her skin flared in response, like a lighthouse answering a ship. That is what they will make weapons of, she said. If the North Lords take it, they will. Break the matrix into fragments and sell them to the highest bidder. The transit that opens shorter paths between systems will become a weapon of theft. We cannot allow that. They worked in silence while the desert held its breath. Jalen fed in hacks and clamps, hot bolts and whisper tools. Eryth sang notes that stitched the old circuits back into tolerance. Metal creaked. The hull groaned like a wail of rust. Around them, they felt the presence of menace. The faint ping of distant scanners, and then the night exploded into noise as a salvage truck discovered them. A firefight began, and not with the grandeur of movies, but with the ugly intimacy of bullets taking grit from the air and the desperate art of men who had sold their nights for coin. Jalen moved with odd efficiency. He had a soldier's reflex and a thief's cunning. Eryth moved in a way he had not seen before. Her light rewired the space, shedding a glow that made the shooter's optics misread distance and motion. They made it to the core, and with a final wrenching motion, they lifted it on a harness of webbing and chains. The ride out was worse. They were discovered by a squad of enforcers led by a figure who wore the badge of the North Lords like a crown. He was called Marlowe Het, a man with the kind of face that had been hammered by easy victories. He smiled when he saw them. "You thought you could take what belongs to order?" he called, and his men laughed. "That you could steal a covenant?" Jalen had no covenant to offer. He had only a packed life of debts and the churning confidence of a man with a friend in his grip. He raised his improvised weapon. The desert lit up with tracer lines, and the air filled with the smell of burned sand. Eryth stood between him and the shots, and for one terrible second the core's light bloomed into full incandescence. It painted her in colors so bright that it hid her contours, and in that blinding bloom, sound came loose, not a word but a flood of memory. Marlowe Het stumbled backward as if struck. His men faltered. The core did not answer their greed with silence. It answered with something else, a bleeding of images, a quick slide of other skies, other faces. And in those images the men saw their children, their gardens, their own small tender mercies. Some of them lowered their weapons. "It's not supposed to happen," Marlowe hissed. "Turn it off, can't," Eryth whispered. The core was a thing with its own mind and memory, and it would not unspool itself for greed. It remembers. But remembering is dangerous. It makes people reluctant to hurt, and that can ruin whole marketplaces. When the dust cleared, Jalen and Eryth had a narrow lead. They took the core, they fled, and they left a city full of men who had, for the first time in years, looked upon themselves and not liked what they saw. Whether that saw changed their choices was a different story to be told down the line. They found refuge in a hidden yard of the Mercer and Gell, who took in stray armor and strange truths for a price. They're under patched canvases, and with a small crew of apprentices curious enough to believe in more than coin, it began the work of hiding the core and of deciding what to do with it. Eryth spoke more of her planet, water-laced planets and violet skies, a council that would judge those who left the Farah alive. She told him of a transit matrix that had been designed to link worlds gently, to exchange knowledge without theft, and of humans who saw the machine only as marketable or... In the soft light of the Mercer shop, Jalen looked at the core safe within its containment jacket and at the alien whose skin glowed like the dawn. He felt an odd hope, sharp and fragile, that they had not only stolen a machine but also stolen the chance to shift the balance. Outside, the Sea of Dunes resumed its commerce. Market life is stubborn and hungry, but something had shifted. Small things lost their ease. A mayor who looked too comfortable in his chair. A guard who paused after seeing a child's face in a holla of home. A seller who found the price of copper less satisfying than the look on a neighbor's face when she bought bread. When Eryth and Jalen finally allowed themselves to rest, they were not free yet. Marlowe Het still wore his arrogance like armor. The North Lords had interests that spanned markets and moons. There were other scavenger bands who would sell out a friend for a single battery, and the transit corps still pulsed, a sleeping library that had chosen them as stewards. "We have to move it off-world," Eryth said softly. "The Farah named me keeper of the core. It chose me, and you want me to help carry it to a starport?" Jalen asked, and his laugh had no humor. "You know the wardens will light the docks on fire if they know." "I know," she said. "But there is a freighter, a midnight run. It will take contraband. If it can leave the system, we can find the Farah's refuge rings." Jalen thought of the freighter and of the water for his sister, and of the ways men carve paths out of sand with stubborn hands. He thought also of the small, burning memory the core had pressed into the minds of the marketmen, an image of a child's hand in another child's. He thought of the choice between staying here and becoming ghosts, or going there and becoming fugitives with purpose. Then we get on that freighter, he said. We make the run, make a place where this thing cannot be sold. Eryth smiled, not triumphantly, but lightly, like someone who had learned to trust in human unpredictability. Then we will need alliances, she said. We will need to become more than a rumor. Outside, the desert sky swelled with a storm. And for a moment, the whole market seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if the next wind would bury history or carry it to the stars.